The train had barely disappeared into the endless Wyoming prairie when Alina Hart realized she had made the greatest mistake of her life. A bitter October wind swept across the lonely station, carrying dust and the smell of coal smoke. The last passenger had already been welcomed by family or friends. Wagons rolled away one after another, their wheels crunching over frozen dirt. Laughter faded into the distance until only silence remained. Alina stood beneath the weathered station roof with one worn suitcase resting beside her boots. Inside her small purse lay only 4 copper coins and a folded letter whose promises had already begun to feel hollow. Within the next few minutes, the man who had invited her across the country would arrive. Before another hour had passed, he would leave her behind without a second glance. And before that long, freezing night came to an end, one unexpected question from a quiet, widowed blacksmith would begin changing all 3 of their lives. October 1889 had painted the Wyoming territory in faded shades of gold and gray. Cold winds drifted down from the mountains earlier than usual that year, warning everyone that winter was already making its slow march across the frontier. For Alina, every mile west had carried both fear and hope. She was only 23, but hardship had already carved quiet lines into her heart. Back in southern Indiana, her family had once owned a modest farm filled with apple trees, chickens, and enough cornfields to keep everyone busy from sunrise until long after dark. Her father often said that honest work could outlast any storm. Then came 3 years of failed harvests. First the drought, then insects, then sickness. The farm slowly disappeared beneath unpaid debts. When her father collapsed while repairing a broken fence after a violent summer storm, Alina lost far more than the head of the household. She lost the one person who had always believed tomorrow would somehow be kinder than today. After his funeral, strangers filled the yard. Auctioneers measured furniture. Neighbors whispered. Bank officials counted every possession. The rocking chair where her mother had sung bedtime songs was carried away by someone Alina had never met. Even the family Bible almost disappeared until an elderly minister quietly purchased it and slipped it back into her hands before leaving. She never forgot that simple act. Sometimes kindness arrived without making any noise at all. With no land, no money, and no relatives willing to take her in, Alina found work sewing dresses during the evenings. The pay barely covered bread. Each week another bill appeared. Each month another door quietly closed. One rainy afternoon, she noticed a small advertisement printed inside a newspaper lying on the tailor's counter. It read, "Respectable ranch owner seeks honest wife willing to build a future in Wyoming territory. Character valued above wealth." The letter was signed by Edwin Holloway. His letters that followed sounded confident and generous. He wrote about fertile land near Sweetwater River. He described a comfortable home. He promised partnership instead of loneliness. He even enclosed a train ticket with a note written in careful handwriting. No woman should face the world alone. Alina believed him. Perhaps she needed to. Sometimes hope speaks louder than caution. The journey west lasted nearly 2 weeks. She crossed endless rivers, forests, and open plains where buffalo trails stretched farther than imagination. She shared train benches with immigrants chasing dreams, soldiers returning home, traveling salesmen, and mothers soothing restless babies through long nights. Each passing mile carried her farther from every memory she had ever known. She spent those evenings reading Edwin's letters beneath the weak glow of the train lamps. Whenever doubt crept into her thoughts, she unfolded those pages once more. She imagined someone waiting, someone smiling, someone grateful she had come. By late afternoon, the locomotive finally slowed as it entered the small railroad town of Dry Creek Crossing. Smoke drifted above rows of wooden buildings. Blacksmith hammers echoed somewhere beyond the station. Coal dust floated through the cold air. It looked rough, unfinished, honest. The conductor tipped his hat politely. End of the line, miss. Eleanor stepped onto the platform holding her father's old silver pocket watch. It had stopped working months ago. She carried it anyway. Some memories deserved to travel even after time itself had stopped. She looked toward the station clock. 3 o'clock. Exactly as Edwin's last letter instructed. "I'll be waiting beneath the clock," he had written. She waited. Families reunited around her. Children laughed. Freight workers loaded wagons. Miners disappeared toward boarding houses with blackened faces and tired shoulders. Every few minutes, Eleanor smoothed the wrinkles from her blue traveling dress. She checked her reflection inside the station window. Perhaps the long journey had made her look exhausted. Perhaps he simply hadn't recognized her. The minutes stretched longer. Half an hour passed. The platform slowly emptied. Clouds swallowed the afternoon sun. A sharp wind rattled the loose boards overhead. Finally, the sound of expensive carriage wheels broke the silence. A polished carriage stopped beside the station. Its glossy paint reflected the fading light. The horses were perfectly groomed. Their leather harnesses looked untouched by real work. A tall man stepped down. Everything about him spoke of wealth. Fine gloves, tailored coat, shining boots. He glanced around until his eyes settled on Eleanor. Instead of smiling, he frowned. "You must be Miss Hart." Relief washed across her face. "Yes, sir." She offered a gentle smile. "I'm grateful you've come." He walked around her slowly. Not greeting her. Inspecting her. His eyes lingered on the small suitcase. The worn stitching on her sleeves. The calluses on her hands. He stopped. I expected someone different. The warmth inside Eleanor disappeared. "I'm afraid I don't understand." He removed one glove with slow precision. "The photograph you sent was flattering." She blinked. "I sent the only photograph I owned." "So you did." His voice remained cold. "You neglected to mention how plainly you carried yourself." She felt her heartbeat quicken. "I came here to build a life." "So your letters claimed." He folded his gloves neatly. "I require a wife capable of entertaining investors and respectable businessmen." Eleanor stared at him. "I have managed a household since I was 15. I don't doubt your usefulness." The words landed harder than a slap. But usefulness and refinement are entirely different matters. For several painful seconds, neither of them spoke. Only the wind answered. Finally, she whispered, "I left everything behind. So I gathered. I have nowhere else." He sighed impatiently. Our correspondence created expectations. His eyes wandered toward the waiting carriage. "I've reconsidered." "You cannot mean that." "I do. My home is gone." "I'm sorry." His face showed no sign that he truly was. "I owe you nothing beyond honesty." He climbed back into the carriage. Eleanor stepped forward. "Please." Her voice broke before she could finish. "I crossed half the country. I wish you well, Miss Hart." The carriage door closed. The driver snapped the reins. Within moments, the horses disappeared into the drifting dust. Eleanor remained standing exactly where he'd left her. The letter in her trembling hand suddenly felt heavier than stone. She slowly opened her purse. 4 small coins rested inside. That was everything. No return ticket. No boarding room. No family. Only 4 cents and a future that had vanished in front of her eyes. The station master approached carrying a lantern. His weathered face softened. We're closing soon, miss. She looked up. I know. There aren't many places open after dark. I understand. He hesitated. I wish there was more I could do. So do I. He tipped his hat before locking the station doors. One by one, the lamps inside went dark. The wind grew colder. Snowflakes began drifting from the evening sky. Alina pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, but it did little against the biting air. Across the street, voices spilled from the saloon. Someone laughed loudly. A piano played a cheerful tune that somehow made the silence around her feel even heavier. She lowered herself onto her suitcase. For the first time since leaving Indiana, she allowed herself to cry. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quiet tears that disappeared almost as quickly as they formed. She wasn't afraid of hard work. She was afraid of becoming invisible. Several people walked past without slowing. One man glanced at her before continuing toward the hotel. Another pulled his coat tighter and hurried away from the coming snow. The frontier could be generous. It could also teach people not to stop. A small sound interrupted her thoughts. Not footsteps. Lighter. Careful. She looked up. A little boy stood several feet away, hiding partly behind the leg of a tall man. The child couldn't have been older than 7. His brown hair curled beneath a knitted cap. He clutched a carved wooden horse missing one wheel. The man beside him wore a heavy leather apron beneath a weathered canvas coat. His broad shoulders carried years of honest labor. Dark soot still marked his sleeves. One hand rested gently on the boy's shoulder. The other held a lantern whose warm light cut through the growing darkness. Unlike everyone else that evening, he wasn't staring at Alina. He was looking at the 4 lonely coins still resting in her open palm. Then he quietly lifted his eyes to meet hers. Without pity, without judgment, only quiet concern. The little boy looked up at him before whispering softly, "Pa, is the lady all alone?" The man gave a slow nod. Then he took one careful step forward. And with the first snow beginning to cover the empty platform, he asked a single question that Alina would remember for the rest of her life. "Ma'am," his steady voice barely rose above the wind, "do you have anywhere safe to spend the night?" Alina could not answer right away. The question settled deep inside her, stirring something she had tried desperately to hide. Pride, fear, exhaustion. She looked down at the 4 copper coins resting in her palm, then slowly closed her fingers around them. The wind carried another burst of snow across the empty platform. "I don't," she admitted at last, her voice barely louder than a whisper. The tall man nodded once. He did not ask why. He did not ask what mistakes had brought her there. He simply accepted the truth she had trusted him enough to speak. "My name is Elias Mercer," he said. "I own the blacksmith shop near Willow Creek." He rested a gentle hand on the shoulder of the little boy beside him. "This is my son, Noah." The boy offered Alina a shy smile. His wooden horse peeked out from behind his coat. "It used to have 4 wheels, Noah explained quietly. One fell off." Despite everything that had happened that day, Alina found herself smiling. "I think it still looks like a brave little horse." Noah's eyes brightened. His father noticed. It was the first smile he had seen on his son since they reached the station. Elias removed his thick wool coat and carefully laid it beside Alina on the bench. "You don't have to trust me," he said calmly. "But you shouldn't spend this night outside." She looked at him carefully. Every lesson her mother had taught her warned against following strangers. Yet every instinct told her this man was nothing like Edwin Holloway. There was no pride in his voice. No hidden bargain. Only simple kindness. My cabin is 3 miles from town, Elias continued. My aunt lives with us. She's been raising Noah since my wife passed away 4 years ago. He paused, giving her room to decide. You'll have your own room. You may lock the door. In the morning, if you wish to leave, I'll hitch the wagon and take you wherever you choose. Alina searched his face. Why? The single word carried every hurt she had suffered. Why help someone you've never met? Elias glanced toward the dark road where Edwin's carriage had disappeared. My father used to say something. He smiled faintly. If you pass a soul freezing in the snow, the weather becomes your responsibility. He looked back at Alina. I've tried to live that way. For several long moments no one spoke. Then Noah stepped closer. Without saying anything, he held out the little wooden horse. You can hold him until you feel better. Alina accepted it with trembling hands. The smooth wood had been polished by years of tiny fingers. She suddenly realized how long it had been since anyone had offered her something without expecting anything in return. A fresh tear slipped down her cheek. This time she didn't wipe it away. She simply nodded. I'd be grateful. The wagon was old but well cared for. Every iron bolt had clearly been shaped by Elias himself. The lantern hanging beside the driver's seat swayed gently as they traveled through the snowy darkness. Dry Creek Crossing slowly disappeared behind them. The road narrowed into open prairie. Cottonwood trees stood like silent guardians beneath the cloudy sky. No one hurried. No one forced conversation. After nearly an hour, warm light appeared between the trees. A modest cabin stood beside a sturdy blacksmith shop, whose chimney still released thin ribbons of smoke into the cold evening air. The steady ring of metal against metal had finally gone quiet for the night. The forge rested. Home had begun. An older woman opened the cabin door before they even reached the porch. Her gray hair was tied beneath a faded bonnet. Flour dust still covered her apron. There you are, she called. I was beginning to worry. Then she noticed Alina. Instead of surprise, her face softened. You've brought company. Elias nodded. This is Miss Alina Hart. She needed somewhere warm. The older woman walked forward and gently took Alina's cold hands into her own. My name is Margaret Mercer. Everyone simply calls me Maggie. Come inside before this weather decides to follow you. The warmth inside the cabin almost brought Alina to tears again. A fire crackled inside the stone hearth. Fresh bread cooled on the table. A kettle sang softly above the flames. Everything smelled of pine wood, cinnamon, and honest work. No luxury. Just peace. Maggie led Alina down a short hallway. This room belonged to my sister years ago. She opened a small wooden door. Inside stood a narrow bed covered with thick quilts. A washstand. A rocking chair. A tiny window overlooking the snow-covered forge. Most importantly, a sturdy lock rested on the inside of the door. You'll have complete privacy, Maggie said kindly. If you need anything, simply knock. Alina looked around the room. It was simple, but after the longest day of her life, it felt like a palace. Thank you, she whispered. You've already thanked us enough. Maggie smiled. Now wash your face. Supper's almost ready. Later that evening, they gathered around the worn oak table. Vegetable stew. Fresh bread. Apple preserves. Nothing extravagant. Yet Alina could not remember tasting a meal that felt so comforting. No one questioned her. No one demanded explanations. Instead, Noah proudly showed her the tiny wooden animals he had carved beside his father. This one is supposed to be a deer. It looks more like a goat. Elias laughed quietly. I told him the same thing. It is not a goat, Noah protested. It just hasn't grown antlers yet. The table filled with gentle laughter. Alina hadn't heard laughter shared so freely in many months. After supper, she quietly stood. May I help clean? Maggie shook her head. You're our guest. I've spent too much of my life sitting while others worked, Alina replied. It feels strange. Elias looked up from drying the dishes. There'll be plenty of work tomorrow. His smile carried no pressure. No rush. That night's sleep refused to come. Alina sat beside the small window watching snow fall across the forge yard. The fire inside the blacksmith shop had finally faded into darkness. She reached into her suitcase and unfolded Edwin's letters. One by one, she fed them into the small fireplace inside her room. The paper curled. The ink blackened. The promises disappeared into ash. Only one thing remained. Her father's silver pocket watch. She held it tightly before climbing into bed. For the first time in weeks, she slept without dreaming. Morning arrived with bright sunshine sparkling across fresh snow. Alina woke early. Old habits refused to disappear. She quietly dressed before anyone else had risen. Passing through the kitchen, she noticed yesterday's dishes already washed. The floor, however, carried muddy footprints from boots. Without thinking, she found a broom leaning behind the pantry. By the time Maggie entered the room, Alina had already swept half the cabin. My goodness! Maggie smiled. You truly don't know how to sit still. Alina blushed. I'm sorry. You needn't apologize. It simply surprised me. After breakfast, Noah ran outside, chasing fresh rabbit tracks. His coat snagged on an old nail beside the porch. The sleeve tore nearly from the shoulder. The little boy froze. His face fell. It was Mama's favorite coat, he whispered. I ruined it. Alina knelt beside him. No. You wore it. There's a difference. She carried the coat inside. Within minutes, she found needle, thread, and a small piece of matching cloth. Her hands moved almost without thought. Years of sewing returned naturally. When she finished, the tear had nearly disappeared. Noah stared in amazement. It looks brand new. Alina smiled. Not brand new. Just loved enough to mend. The boy threw his arms around her without warning. Thank you. Across the room, Elias had been quietly repairing a wagon harness. He stopped working. For a long moment, he simply watched. His son's laughter had become rare since losing his mother. Yet here it was again. Natural. Unforced. Alive. Before the story continues, tell me in the comments, do you believe kindness can change a person's entire future, even when it begins with one simple question? Elias lowered his tools. He looked toward Alina with quiet gratitude. Then Noah asked something so innocent. It brought complete silence to the little cabin. Looking up at Alina with hopeful eyes, he smiled and said, Miss Alina, will you still be here when I wake up tomorrow? The question hung quietly in the warm cabin. Even the fire seemed to soften its crackling. Alina looked into Noah's hopeful eyes. She had crossed nearly 2,000 miles, believing she was traveling toward a new beginning. Now, after only 2 days inside this humble home, a little boy was asking her to stay. She smiled gently. I'll still be here tomorrow. Relief spread across Noah's face. He hugged his little wooden horse against his chest. Good. Then he hurried outside to show Maggie the repaired coat once again. The cabin grew quiet. Elias cleared his throat and returned to the leather harness resting on his workbench. I hope he didn't make you uncomfortable, he said. He hasn't smiled this much in a long while. Alina shook her head. He reminds me that children don't hide what they feel. No. Elias smiled faintly. They're usually much braver than adults. The days slowly settled into an unexpected rhythm. Alina never intended to become part of the household. She simply wanted to earn enough money to stand on her own feet again. Each morning she swept the cabin before sunrise. She baked fresh biscuits with Maggie. She mended torn shirts for the miners who visited the forge. By afternoon, she carefully recorded orders and payments in a worn leather ledger. After discovering Elias' numbers, often ended up scattered across loose scraps of paper. "You've saved me from losing half my accounts," Elias admitted one evening. "My father always believed every dollar deserved a proper place," Alina replied. "He made me practice bookkeeping before I was tall enough to see over the table." Elias chuckled. "I wish I'd met him. I think he would have liked you." The words slipped out before she realized what she had said. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the steady rhythm of Elias' hammer echoed through the valley. Inside, something quiet began growing between them. Not romance. Not yet. Trust. Winter settled across Wyoming with surprising speed. Snow covered the hills surrounding Willow Creek. Travelers stopped more often at the blacksmith shop, needing wagon wheels repaired before storms blocked the mountain roads. Business grew busier than Elias had seen in years. One afternoon, Maggie watched Alina helping organize supplies inside the workshop. "You've changed this place," the older woman said softly. Alina looked confused. "I've only cleaned a little." Maggie smiled. "No. You've brought peace." She glanced toward Elias, who was shaping glowing iron beneath his hammer. "My nephew forgot how to laugh after Sarah died." Alina had heard Sarah's name only once before. She waited quietly. "She was gentle," Maggie continued. "She loved wildflowers. When fever came through the valley, it took her within 5 days. Elias never truly recovered." She looked toward Noah, building tiny snow forts beside the stable. The boy lost both his mother and the cheerful father he remembered. "But lately," she smiled again, "they're both returning." Alina felt a lump rise in her throat. She hadn't realized her presence mattered so much. A week later, Alina approached Elias after supper. "I've been thinking." He looked up from sharpening a horseshoe rasp. "About what?" "I can't continue living here without paying my share. You've already earned every meal. I still owe you." "You owe me nothing." "I disagree." She reached into her suitcase and removed a neatly folded cloth. Inside rested the small wages he had earned sewing dresses back in Indiana. She had protected those few dollars through the entire journey west. "It's not much, but I'd like to rent the room." Elias gently pushed the money back toward her. "No." She frowned. "I'm not asking for charity. And I'm not offering it." He folded her fingers around the little bundle. "If you wish to stay, then stay because you choose to. Not because you feel trapped. My wife used to tell me something." He smiled sadly. "A gift stops being a gift the moment it demands repayment." Alina stared at him. No one had ever spoken to her that way. Not as someone helpless, but as someone whose choices still mattered. That night she cried quietly behind her bedroom door. Not from sadness. From relief. By early December, nearly everyone in Dry Creek Crossing knew about the young woman living at the Mercer cabin. Most people admired the arrangement. A few did not. The loudest voice belonged to Harriet Collins, who owned the town's largest boarding house. One afternoon, she cornered Maggie outside the general store. People are talking. Maggie calmly continued placing flour into her wagon. They always are. It isn't respectable. What isn't? A widower sharing his home with a young woman. They're not sharing a room. That doesn't matter. Appearances matter. Maggie closed the wagon lid. I've lived long enough to know kindness matters more. Harriet sniffed. The church elders may think differently. They're welcome to visit. They'll find a hardworking woman, a grieving father, and a happy little boy. She climbed into the wagon. I've stopped worrying about people who judge before asking questions. Word eventually reached Alina. That evening, she quietly folded laundry while staring into the fire. Elias. He looked up. Yes. Maybe I should leave before people cause trouble for your family. Noah immediately looked frightened. Leave. She forced a smile. I'm only talking. Elias slowly set aside the horseshoe he had been polishing. He walked across the room until they stood facing one another. Do you want to leave? She hesitated. No. Then don't. It's hurting your reputation. My reputation survived blizzards, broken wagons, and bad harvests. It'll survive gossip. She looked down. I don't want to be anyone's burden. You aren't. He spoke so simply that the words settled deep inside her heart. You've become part of this home. Silence filled the room. Noah quietly reached over and slipped his small hand into Alina's. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Christmas arrived wrapped beneath fresh snow. The Mercer cabin held no expensive decorations. Only pine branches above the fireplace. A few handmade paper stars. Fresh cinnamon bread. Noah proudly hung tiny carved ornaments across the mantel. Alina secretly stitched him a thick wool scarf using leftover yarn Maggie had saved for years. When he opened it, his eyes filled with tears. You made this. I did. No one's ever made me something before. He wrapped it around his neck, immediately despite being indoors. It fits perfectly. Elias watched quietly from across the room. Later that evening, after Noah had fallen asleep beside the fire, Elias stepped outside to bring in more wood. Alina followed carrying an empty basket. The night sky glittered with countless stars. Snow reflected silver moonlight across the valley. For several moments they stood without speaking. Finally, Elias broke the silence. When Sarah died, he stared toward the dark hills. I stopped making plans. I only thought about surviving another day. Alina listened. I believed loving someone again would somehow erase her. He shook his head. I know now it doesn't work that way. You never stop loving people you've lost. You simply learn your heart can make room. Alina looked toward the glowing cabin windows. I used to think home was a place. She spoke softly. Now, I'm beginning to think it's the people who wait for you when the day ends. Their eyes met. Neither looked away. Before either could speak another word, the distant sound of galloping horses shattered the peaceful night. A rider burst into the forge yard, waving his hat wildly. His frightened voice echoed through the frozen valley. Mercer. Elias rushed forward. What happened? The exhausted ranch hand struggled to catch his breath. It's my wife. She's expecting the baby. The storm washed out the bridge. The doctor can't reach us. You've got the strongest horses in the valley. Please. His voice broke. I need your help. If this story has touched your heart so far, don't forget to like it and subscribe for more emotional Wild West stories where courage, kindness, and hope shape every frontier journey. Elias looked toward the dark sky. Heavy storm clouds were already rolling over the mountains. He knew exactly what riding into them meant. Then he turned toward Alina. Their eyes met across the snow. Neither of them realized. The dangerous journey waiting before sunrise would change far more than one family's future. Elias did not hesitate. "Get the team ready," he told the ranch hand. "We'll leave within 5 minutes." "The roads are disappearing," Maggie warned as she stepped onto the porch. "I know. The creek will already be rising." "I know that too." He looked toward the frightened young man. "But someone is waiting for us." Alina quietly disappeared into the cabin. A moment later, she returned carrying a thick wool blanket, a lantern with fresh oil, and a small leather satchel Maggie had packed with clean cloths and dried herbs. She placed the satchel into Elias' hands. "You'll need these." Their eyes met. For a brief moment, neither spoke. Then Alina reached forward and straightened the collar of his coat. It was such a small gesture, yet it carried more care than 100 promises. "Come back safely," she whispered. Elias gave a quiet nod. "I'll do everything I can." Within minutes, the wagon disappeared into the swirling snow. The storm grew fierce before midnight. Wind battered the cabin walls. Snow piled against the porch steps. Noah sat beside the window, clutching his wooden horse. "When will Pa come home?" "I don't know." "Will he?" Alina knelt beside him. She brushed a loose curl from his forehead. "Your father has never stopped helping people. And people like that fight very hard to come home." Noah leaned against her shoulder. "I prayed." "So did I," Alina admitted softly. The little boy slipped his hand into hers. They waited together. Hours passed. The fire burned lower. Maggie quietly added another log. Just before dawn, the sound of wagon wheels echoed outside. The front door flew open. Cold air rushed inside. Elias stood there covered in snow from hat to boots. His beard was lined with frost. His hands were raw from the frozen rains. But he was smiling. "The baby's here," he said with a tired laugh. "A healthy little girl." Everyone breathed again. Noah raced across the room and wrapped both arms around his father. "You came back." "I promised I would." Elias held his son tightly before looking toward Alina. She could see the exhaustion in his face. Without a word, she poured him a cup of hot coffee. Their hands brushed as he accepted it. Neither pulled away immediately. Winter slowly loosened its grip. By March, the snow began melting into rushing creeks. The forge grew busier than ever. Travelers spread word that Elias Mercer did honest work at honest prices. Soon farmers came from neighboring settlements. Ranchers waited in line for wagon repairs. Alina's careful bookkeeping kept every order organized. She even began sewing sturdy work gloves from leftover leather scraps. Customers loved them. For the first time in years, the Mercers were able to repair the barn roof and replace broken tools before they completely failed. One afternoon, Maggie smiled as she watched the busy yard. "This place feels different." Alina looked around. Children laughed while waiting for wagons. Neighbors shared coffee on the porch. The forge rang with steady blows of the hammer. "It feels alive," Maggie continued. "And so do the people inside it." As spring wildflowers pushed through the thawing earth, Alina made a quiet decision. She found Elias repairing a plow near sunset. "I've been meaning to speak with you." He laid the hammer aside. "What's on your mind?" She took a slow breath. "When I first arrived, I believed I had lost everything." He listened without interrupting. "But somewhere between mending Noah's coat, sharing meals, and watching this forge become home. I stopped wishing for my old life. Elias looked down for a moment before reaching into his pocket. I've been carrying something. He unfolded a small cloth. Inside rested a simple silver ring. Not polished. Not decorated. Hand-forged. Every mark on it had been shaped by his own hammer. I started making this weeks ago. I almost threw it away. Why? I never wanted you to feel you owed me anything. You never have. He stepped closer. I cannot offer grand houses. I cannot promise riches. There will be difficult winters, long days, and more hard work than comfort. He smiled gently. But I can promise this. You will never again wonder whether someone is coming for you. I'll be there. In every season. Alina felt tears gathering in her eyes. Not because of the ring. Because every word carried the quiet truth she had longed to hear. I don't need a mansion, she whispered. I only need someone whose promises stay. She held out her hand. I choose you, Elias. Before he could place the ring on her finger, a familiar voice interrupted them. Well, I wasn't expecting this. Both turned. A polished carriage stood near the gate. Stepping down was Edwin Holloway. Gone was the confident smile. His coat looked worn. Dust covered his boots. The pride that once surrounded him had disappeared. He removed his hat awkwardly. I've made mistakes. Neither Alina nor Elias spoke. Edwin swallowed hard. My investments failed. The railroad canceled several contracts. My ranch is gone. He looked directly at Alina. I heard you've become well respected here. I came to apologize. Alina remained calm. He continued. I judged you by your clothes. I judged you by your hands. I was wrong. He hesitated. If you're willing, I'd like another chance. Silence settled across the yard. Only the sound of the forge fire could be heard. Finally, Alina stepped forward. Months earlier, she would have struggled to meet his eyes. Now she stood with quiet confidence. You once looked at these hands and saw someone beneath you. She raised them gently. They're the same hands. They still carry scars from the farm. They still mend torn coats. They still work every day. The only difference, she smiled warmly, is that someone else recognized their worth. Edwin lowered his eyes. I know. No. You understand now. But knowing and deserving aren't the same. She looked toward Elias. He offered kindness before he knew my story. He gave me dignity when I had nothing. He never tried to own my future. He simply gave me the freedom to choose it. She reached for Elias' hand. And I've already made my choice. Edwin slowly nodded. For the first time, there was no argument. No pride. Only regret. I truly am sorry. I believe you are, Alina replied. And I hope you become a better man because of it. But my road no longer leads back to you. Edwin placed his hat back on his head. I understand. He climbed into the carriage. This time when it rolled away, Alina did not watch it disappear. She had spent enough of her life looking backward. On a bright Sunday morning in early May, neighbors gathered beneath the tall cottonwood trees beside the forge. Wildflowers covered the hills. Birdsong filled the cool spring air. The minister smiled as Elias and Alina stood hand in hand. Noah proudly carried a small basket of blue wildflowers. When the vows were finished, he looked up with a grin. So, Does this mean Miss Alina is really my mama now? The guests laughed softly. Alina knelt beside him. Only if that's what you still want. Noah wrapped his arms tightly around her. I wanted that the very first night. She held him close. So did I. Even Maggie wiped away a tear. As the celebration continued, Elias leaned close. Do you remember the night we met? Alina smiled. I remember every moment. You were sitting alone with 4 little coins. And you asked me one question. He nodded. I almost kept walking. She looked surprised. You did. I wasn't sure whether you'd trust a stranger. She squeezed his hand. I'm glad you stopped. So am I. They stood together watching Noah chase butterflies through the meadow. The forge behind them rang once as the warm breeze nudged the hanging hammer. It sounded almost like a church bell. Alina realized something then. She had boarded that train believing her future depended on someone choosing her. Instead, her future began the moment someone showed kindness without asking for anything in return. And from that kindness, she found something far greater than the wealthy life she had once imagined. She found respect. She found family. She found a home built not with money, but with trust. As the sun settled over the Wyoming hills, Elias quietly took her hand once more. This time, she knew with complete certainty that he would never let it go. If this story reminded you that one act of kindness can change a life forever, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy heartfelt Wild West stories of courage, family, and hope, don't forget to subscribe for the next journey across the frontier.